Let's go ahead and jump into a kind of interesting call from JC in Spain. I'm very curious about this question you have for us, JC. What's on your mind?
Hi guys, thanks for taking my call. I wrote this. I just want to know or hear your guys' thoughts if you think Jesus, if he lived in today's world, if he would choose to be vegan. So a vegan is just somebody who does not needlessly exploit animals.
Yeah, I would have a hard time with that idea, just depending on how we define who Jesus is or was. Obviously, if we come to it with the idea that Jesus never existed, then anything is up for grabs. And that being said, if we're playing along with the idea of Jesus, then I have to say that we should include the idea that he was the beginning and the end and that he's unchanging. So if 2,000 years ago, Jesus wasn't vegan, I don't know why modern day Jesus would be vegan. I don't know how God can say, go be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth, rule over the fish, rule over the birds of the sky, rule over every living creature that moves on the earth, and then frame this idea of like a peaceful, hippie, vegan Jesus in the modern era. I don't know. Godless Engineer, how does that land for you?
Yeah, the vegan sort of lifestyle or initiative, I mean, as far as I understand it, like the push for it is fairly recent, like a fairly modern thing. So, I mean, I would think that if Jesus were still around today after 2,000 years, I don't see any reason why he would be vegan, but I mean, all of this is really speculation about it. But I mean, considering the demeanor of first century Jews, like they weren't really concerned with ethical treatment of animals. So I don't think that he would be.
So you think he would be okay with like needlessly killing animals? Because one could make the argument that back in the days, it might have been needed for survival to consume these animals. And that's why I was asking about today's time, right? Where somebody can choose to either needlessly kill animals or not to do so. And if you're with the concept of a benevolent, compassionate individual, I don't see how that individual could needlessly kill animals, like when there's other options.
Sure, but you're calling the historical Jesus or the character of Jesus this benevolent person, and I can appreciate that characterization, but we're also basing everything that we know or don't know or imagine or understand about Jesus on these books that are allegedly perfect and that have not been changed and that reflect a God who has always been one particular way. It kind of comes down to this question of, does God evolve? And I think that most Christian theology would reject that idea. If God was all powerful 2,000 years ago, then he didn't need to rely on meat, but chose to.
Yeah, it also seems kind of weird to expect, at least for me, it seems weird to either think about or expect a figure from a religion that regularly mandated the slaughter of animals in order to perform blood magic. And I'm not just talking about one or two animals. We're talking about thousands of animals is what they depict in the Hebrew Bible of slaughtering them. And I mean, I just want people to really take this in because they were pretty explicit in the Hebrew Bible. Like they wanted you to sacrifice the animal, right? But also then cut out its entrails and burn them to a crisp, like on an altar, so that he could, for some reason, like either for the free smells, like he's had some kind of ancient Jimmy John's or like something, I don't know. But I just don't see why this figure from history would ever care whatsoever about the suffering of animals.
Okay, maybe to rephrase then, let's not and talk about the character, but would a compassionate individual in today's world needlessly kill animals?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, and I definitely appreciate the vegan movement. I very much appreciate this notion that we should, as a moral society, mitigate or limit or eradicate to our ability all harm and suffering caused to conscious creatures. Does that mean that it is impossible to be a compassionate human being without being a vegan? I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to take that position, but I can at least appreciate the idea of it.
Okay. I mean, just to be clear, veganism is not about reducing suffering. It's about not exploiting animals, like using them for our benefit, where we have options. So for me personally, I don't see how somebody, I'm not saying non-vegans are not compassionate, but somebody who's like aware that they are needlessly killing animals, I don't see how that could be a compassionate person who then goes out of their way to pay for that to happen.
And yeah, we would really have to define the word needless or the concept of need. In psychology, when we discuss a need, it's not out of this contrast with a want. It's not based on the idea that like you have to have certain things in order to survive versus things that you would just kind of enjoy. At least in my field, when we talk about a need, it is something that empowers us or enables us to achieve our absolute highest level of performance or potential. So can we really say that slaughtering animals is needless? We'd really have to define our terms and talk about what we mean, all of which gets pretty far astray from the notion of what would Jesus do. But I'm willing to go down that road with you if you like.
Yeah, for sure. So what I mean with need is not required for survival or for your health. Like you can be just as healthy on a plant-based diet, making the killing of these animals. By the way, also the animals in the milk industry, egg industry, even the wool industry, all of them end up in the slaughterhouse. So I'm just saying, yeah, it's not required, and the killing of them is needless killing.
I do hear that, and I really am sympathetic to your point of view while wanting to point out that there is a lot of, quote, needless suffering that exists in our world if you use that definition of the word needless. Do I need a high-powered cell phone? Do I need fast fashion? Do I need to be able to stream Netflix? All of these industries are fraught with all kinds of moral issues and are no doubt responsible for human suffering. And I, at the very least, want to rank human suffering as equally important, if not slightly more important, than the suffering of non-human species. Does it matter? Do I care about the well-being of animals? Do I care about humans being careless and taking advantage of animal welfare and well-being or taking it for granted? Yeah, I do think that these issues matter. But to just categorize it as needless or as important or whatever else feels really narrow. And I can't say that I'm really along for your definitions here.
Okay, yeah, the difference there with the human suffering, again, veganism is about not exploiting animals, so using them as tools of slavery. The difference there is that in these human industries, no one is getting bred into existence to be forced into a slaughterhouse. So it's like a severity difference there, right? So it's like,
again, we might be playing with words to a certain extent. It's certainly not as if any human being has ever sired another human being with the express intention of extracting labor from them. That is not a claim that we can really make historically or even in the modern era. So again, I appreciate where you're coming from, but it does feel kind of philosophically flimsy to me.
I don't see how. I don't know if we are talking past each other. I mean, I'm just talking about taking the life of another sentient being when you have the option to do so. I mean, if you guys are taking the lives of humans, if you don't need to do so, we can talk about that first. But if you're not doing that, I think the bigger elephant in the room is the needless slaughter of trillions of animals per year.
I mean, at the macro scale, we are needlessly, to use these definitions, taking the lives of human beings in a great number of ways. So I don't mean to get mixed up in whataboutism or say like, well, we'll deal with veganism when we have like dealt with all war and ended all human suffering. I don't want to be that careless with it, but I'm having a really hard time seeing how your position really fits in the context of the modern world.
Like, are you currently paying for humans to be killed?
I mean, in a complex way, I'm certainly not ever sitting down and making the decision, oh, yes, I will contribute to human suffering in this way. And am very aware that there are companies that I regularly contribute money to that have abysmal human rights records. I try to be a responsible consumer. I try to be thoughtful about these kinds of things. And I know that, I mean, to use Coca-Cola as one example, anytime I am buying a Coke product, I am giving money to an organization with a human rights record that we can very directly tie to unnecessary deaths.
Mm-hmm. And exploitation, right? Unnecessary exploitation. Because the thing is, right, and whenever somebody buys any animal product, you know for a fact that an animal is going to get killed for that, to replace that item, right, by a supply and demand. So I don't know if that's the case in things like Coke. And even if that was the case in things like Coke, how would that justify also then killing the animals and taking their lives if you don't have to?
Yeah, I mean, direct and indirect consequences, like these are very thorny issues. I think we're kind of just right back to arguments that we've heard before about how veganism is potentially a much more moral perspective. And there are reasons to push back against that. There are things to consider in terms of having a world of finite resources and putting these restrictions on what resources are available to us. I don't know how deeply I want to go into that since I feel like we've had this veganism conversation before. Godless Engineer, is there anything that I may be missing here that you want to make sure to throw in?
Well, yeah, I just had a quick thought, and maybe JC has a good explanation for me or a good response, but let's just hypothetically, entertaining an idea without accepting it, let's just say that we forego, like the entire human race forgoes all meat products, right? And we just rely on a vegan lifestyle. How do you explain the massive destruction of ecological systems in order to provide the amount of food that we would need to provide for the entire human race to be vegan, as well as producing, any supplements that we would need to use for like iron and stuff, or however, I'm not sure how that's accounted for in veganism. I'm assuming that you would have to take supplements in order to get all the nutrients that you would normally get. I'm just wondering, how do you respond to the wanton destruction of whole ecological systems in order to produce enough food for us?
Okay. So that is not really a vegan question because veganism is concerned with the exploitation, so the slavery status of animals, but I'm still happy to answer this environmental question. So currently we are growing 75% of the plants that we grow are for the farmed animals because these farmed animals are also eating something, right? So if the environment is your concern, going on a plant-based diet, like many people do who are plant-based for the environment, would be the best thing you can do because not only are you going to save on land, we will need much, much less land to produce the plants that we eat directly rather than growing plants to feed to the animals. And we'd also need much less water. There would be much less emissions, all this refrigeration and so on, transportation of these products from the farms to the animals and then killing the animals and so on. So it's much more inefficient to be consuming animal products, first of all.
Yeah, if we are starting from scratch, like if we are able to play SimCity and just rejigger the entire global economy, I think that that's very true. And on an individual basis, I think that that can also be very true. But if I'm understanding Godless Engineer's question, it's more of a, how do we get there? You know, if we were to just make that switch overnight because we have this moral calling to never cause the death or exploitation of an animal, we get ourselves into incredibly dangerous situations that negatively impact the health and well-being of millions, if not billions, of currently living humans.
Yeah, again, we grow 75% of the crops for the animals. Right, so we wouldn't have a problem of food shortage or anything like this.
I mean, we would,
so I don't know.
You know, not to say that we can't work through those growing pains or that we shouldn't be working in that direction, which, by the way, just speaking for myself, is a philosophy that I support and that I am wanting to be a part of.
I'm not understanding something. But I mean, you're taking back like the amount of food that we're growing specifically for animals, but I feel like that would entail the question of, well, how are these animals going to eat? How are they going to survive? Like, I mean, we've domesticated them, and you know, a lot of them wouldn't know how to live out in the wild. Are you suggesting that we reduce their population to where they can live off of whatever we're not going to farm, or like, what's the solution there?
Yeah, so the world isn't going to go vegan overnight, right? It's just going to be 1% at a time. And if you, for example, decide to be vegan today, then there'll be less animals which are in future bred into existence to be killed for you. So currently, we kill just land animals, approximately 80 billion land animals, right? And the more people who go vegan, the less animals will be bred into existence because these animals are not producing naturally, right? There's artificial insemination, like in the dairy industry and so on. So the more people go vegan, the less animals there will be produced, right? And when we eventually get to the vegan world, where everyone is vegan, we will also have things like sanctuaries, which already exist now, which are places to keep these animals till the end of their life without exploiting and needlessly killing them. But we are so far from that, and I don't know exactly how that will turn around. But fact is, currently, if you're not vegan, each time you buy animal products, you are paying for animals to be bred into existence and kicked into a slaughterhouse for products you do not need or require for survival or health.
Again, I push back on that notion of need, but I very much take your point, and I'm sympathetic to it. And maybe it is just my own inability to fully embrace a vegan lifestyle that it has me on the defensive or not willing to accept what you're saying whole cloth. I do really take your point, and I think that the world will be a better place as we progressively rely more and more on non-meat food sources, and as we progressively more and more get away from the dairy industry and from other things that lead to greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, and to very tangible suffering among the animal population. Does that mean that I am willing at this stage of my life to wholly stop eating meat? It doesn't. And perhaps I should, and perhaps that's just an unexamined part of myself. But I also know that for myself and doubtlessly billions of other people, that seems like a remarkable impracticability while trying to live in alignment with my other values, which I do have a responsibility to triage and to try and navigate. That's what I was mentioning earlier when I brought up ideas like Coca-Cola and Nestle. It's not that we have to currently live in some perfect nirvana to make a decision about working towards these things. It is, however, true that I know that I can't do all of the moral good or avoid all of the moral harm in the world that I would like, and that I have a moral responsibility to myself and my family and my community and the world at large to make as wise-minded decisions about this as I possibly can. And at least for my family in the here and now, veganism is not at the top of the priority list. And I hope that that makes sense and is okay. Maybe I'll lose more sleep over it overnight and start drifting further in that direction. But I know I'm just not there myself. And I think that would be true for many in the audience.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, veganism is not really concerned with what you eat necessarily, right? Again, it's about not exploiting animals. I know we are focusing a lot on the diet aspect, but vegans also don't buy clothing that exploits animals, cosmetics that touches on animals. We also don't go to the zoo.
I know I'm oversimplifying in those ways, and I definitely appreciate that. And I do want to be an ethical consumer, but ethical consumption means making a lot of compromises and trying to figure out sort of the least moral evil in a lot of ways. You know, it's much easier for me to say that I'm not going to go to a zoo, and then maybe I can have conversations about like rehabilitative zoos or sanctuary zoos, and is that okay, or to what extent, and is this particular one morally superior to a SeaWorld or some other type of zoo? And there are important decisions to be making here, and I think we also, as human beings, have to acknowledge the decision fatigue that comes from taking this task on. I'm not saying we should be lazy or just dismiss all of it. I'm saying that me, myself, and my family, we're not there yet.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, the main thing I want to convey here is just that people are aware, because most people are not born vegan. Myself, I used to consume these products every day. I was just not aware that I am directly responsible for the killing of animals, even though I don't have to. So it just boils down to the question, do you think it's okay for you to kill animals just because you want to? And that's a question you guys need to answer for yourself, and I guess your audience too. And if somebody's not okay with killing animals just because they want to, then they should go vegan, because every time they purchase any animal product, they are killing animals just because they want to, even though there are other alternatives.
Yeah.
So,
again, I'll just say that need and want dichotomy feels very narrow and limited for me. But I take your point, and I think that's everything on me. Godless Engineer, please let you take it out.
I mean, I feel like that's just as ridiculous as asking like a lion to go vegan, and like a lion just kills because they want to, you know, they want to, or
Lions
something like that.
want to murder gazelles.
Yeah, or something. Like I feel like I'm in agreement with you, Christy. I feel like it's kind of a narrow dichotomy there, and I just framing it in the way that you're framing it, JC, I feel like adds a whole bunch of like preconditions and maybe some presuppositions onto it that just makes it loaded. Like it's just an entirely loaded dichotomy there.
So we appreciate, JC, your questions about moral philosophy, and I think that you are raising some interesting topics. I think we're going to get back to our show on the evidence of God and how we react to it, but I appreciate your call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your time, guys. It was awesome talking to you. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Take good care. All right, so it was a little bit slipped in with the question of would Jesus be vegan, but I was willing to play along, and I do think that there's some interesting moral philosophy to consider about our impact on the world and our impact on others, and how we as atheists derive our moral philosophy if it's not coming from God's edict to take dominion over the land or his list of 10 commandments. Anything else you want to add here?
Well, I'll just say that if we can get to a point where like either that 3D printed meat is viable, like it financially, fiscally viable, or
and also ecologically, you know, as we're using the electricity and everything else, those are big questions.
Yeah, if we can come up with meat alternatives where we don't have to, slaughter animals in order to get meat or anything like that, I'd be totally up for that. And for me personally, what I try to do is I try to minimize the amount of suffering. Like what amount of suffering is in my power to minimize. I try my best to minimize it. I try to ethically source like any eggs or any meat products that I get here at the house. And, that typically ends up being kind of difficult, but we carefully curate what kind of meat we get and where we get it from.
Right. And that's the thing that I didn't want to be accused of like trying to brag on here. Like, well, I'm not vegan, but because I do take that sort of black and white perspective that JC is putting forward. And I want to question it with, you know what, my family is thoughtful about only buying pork that we know is farm raised, whereas we're less responsible about chickens. We try not to eat octopus. Are these the right moral decisions for us to be making? I don't know. They're the ones that we came to after some thought and some reason. So they're not just arbitrary and out of nowhere, but they're also not going to be nearly as black and white as what JC is pushing for. Something for everybody, I think, to just be thoughtful about as we're intentional and mindful in our consumption.
Yeah, totally.